The woman in northern China was 61 years old. Her name was Han Sajin. She had been waiting 26 years to do what she was about to do, and she was not going to be stopped by a phone call or a plane or a gun or a man's soul still called the devil. She wanted my middle son. She wanted T. She did not want to kill him. She wanted to take him home. I am going to tell you how I found that out. I am going to tell you what I had to do to keep him. I am going to tell you the secret about my husband's father that I learned in a hospice room in Dalian on a Wednesday in January. The one that explained the photograph. The one that explained Mrs. Bay's son. The one that explained why my husband had been a quiet boy who liked to draw before he became the man's soul calls the devil. I am going to tell you all of it. It is going to be the hardest story I have ever told. If you have been with me, if you said asterisk witness asterisk, if you said asterisk grave asterisk stay, get comfortable, find your person, hold their hand if you have one. The photograph came on a Wednesday in October. The boys had just turned 2. My mother's grave in a cemetery in southwest Atlanta, the flowers I'd had FedExed the previous week still on it. No message, no return address. Postmarked from a town in northern China called Dandong, which sits on the river that separates China from North Korea and which I had not heard of until I looked it up. I showed it to my husband. He looked at it for a long time. He said, "He has people we did not know about." I said, "I know." He said, "I do not know who took this picture." I said, "But I know how to find out." I want to back up for a second and tell you what the year between part 1 and now had been like, because you deserve that context. The year had been soft. That's the only word. We had been soft. Mrs. Bay was gone. I'm not going to tell you what happened to her. I asked Jiwon once, and he said, "Amara, I cannot give you that and have you still look at me the way you look at me now," and I let it go and I have not asked since. There are some choices in a marriage that have to live in only one of the two heads, and I think she is one of his. The brother, Jiwon's older half-brother, the one who had hunted us for a year, was gone. Confirmed. The council had ruled. Jiwon had been formally confirmed as the head of his family for 20 years. The men who had defected back when his warehouses were burning had been quietly rotated out or had quietly disappeared, and I did not ask which, because I had learned not to ask which. The estate was a different place. The east wing, which had been the strangest part of the house when I lived there as a maid, was now the loudest part of the house. 3 2-year-old boys with 3 2-year-old voices and 3 2-year-old sets of feet that had finally figured out how to run. June was the smallest and the loudest. T was the quiet one. He would sit and stack blocks for an hour without saying anything, just watching them, like the blocks owed him something. Jiwon the baby. We still called him Jiwon the baby, even though he wasn't a baby anymore, because we couldn't call him little Jiwon, and we couldn't call him asterisk Junior, and we couldn't bear to call him just Jiwon because that was his father's name. So he was Jiwon the baby, and he will be Jiwon the baby until he is 40. Jiwon the baby had become exactly what his face had promised the night he was born. Stubborn, sturdy, quietly furious about anything he could not immediately have. We had a new head of household, a woman named Mrs. Jai. Late 50s, no children, devoted to the boys in a way that I had been worried about for the first month, and then had stopped being worried about. She had Jiwon's family's full background check, and she'd been vetted by Minjun personally, which meant she'd been vetted twice, because Minjun did not trust anyone in our house ever again after Mrs. Bay, and he was right not to. Minjun was still with us, closer than before. He had a small house at the edge of the property, and he came up to the main house every morning at 7 to have breakfast with Jiwon. And on Saturdays, he sat on the floor in our living room and let Jiwon the baby try to feed him pieces of dry cereal one at a time. And once, when he didn't know I was watching, I saw him press his lips to the top of T's head and close his eyes for a count of 3. And that was when I knew that the man who had picked us up at Incheon a year before would die for any one of those boys, and probably for me too, and that the family I had married into was not just blood. It was choice. It was people who had been at the bottom of the steps when I came home with 3 car seats and had cried into their own hands when nobody was watching. That was the year. We had been soft. The photograph ended soft. I knew how to find out who had sent the photograph because I had a thing I had never told my husband I had. I'm going to tell you about it now because it is the thread the rest of this story hangs from. The morning Mrs. Bay was taken out of the house, I told you I was not going to tell you what my husband decided about her, and I am not going to. That is still his, Mrs. Jai, and I had to clean out her room. I did it myself. I did not let Mrs. Jai touch any of it. Mrs. Bay had been with the family for 19 years and I had loved her, and even after what she had done, I could not put another woman's hands on what she had left behind. I packed her clothes into a single duffel bag. I emptied the small bookshelf. I lifted the corner of the rug to check for the kind of thing my husband had taught me to check for, and underneath the rug, on the wood, in a small fitted recess I had not known was there, was a wooden box. Cedar, the size of a hardback book. It had a small brass clasp. I sat on the floor of Mrs. Bay's emptied room for a long time before I opened it. I knew, looking at that box, that she should not have had it. A woman who had been betraying the family for 9 months would have burned the things in that box on her first night as a traitor. The clipping would have given her away. The photograph would have softened her. A professional would have destroyed everything in it before she went to her first meeting with the brothers' intermediary. Mrs. Bay had not. She had kept the box under the rug, where it could be found, where she was risking being found, because she had not been able to make her own hands burn a photograph of her 16-year-old son. I understood that the moment I lifted the rug. The same emotional failure that had let me find her son's face had let her be the woman who got caught. She had not been a good traitor. She had been a grieving mother who had agreed to a bad deal and had not been able to make her body carry through with the part of the deal that would have made her safe. That was who she had been. I have thought about that a lot. Inside were 4 things. The first was a small photograph of a Korean teenage boy, 16 years old, with his arm around a younger Mrs. Bay, her son. The one I had heard about for the first time the night she confessed. He was smiling. He had 2 front teeth that overlapped slightly. He was wearing a school uniform. The second was a thin gold ring, a wedding band. I do not know whose. The third was a folded newspaper clipping from 1989, in Korean, that I could not read. I had Min-jun translate it for me a week later. It reported the death of a young man named Park Min-yi and his 9-month-old daughter Park Yoon-hee in what was officially called a vehicular incident in Yongsan. Mrs. Bay had kept the clipping for 35 years. I do not know why she had kept it. I have my guesses. The fourth thing was a business card. The card had no name on it, just a phone number and 1 line of English text in small print at the bottom. I knew his mother. I owe her my life. Call if you ever need a person who is not in his world. I put the 4 things back in the box. I closed the clasp. I took the box to my closet, and I put it on the high shelf inside a hat box that had belonged to my own mother, and I did not tell my husband, and I did not look at it again for 14 months. I did not tell him because I did not know what it was. A dead boy and a wedding ring and a clipping about a man and a baby killed in 1989 and a business card from a woman who had known Ji-won's mother. They were not connected. I could not connect them. And the box belonged to a woman who had betrayed us, which meant anything in it could be a trap, and I was not going to bring my husband a trap. I waited. I told myself I was waiting until I understood it. I was actually waiting until something happened that gave me a reason to call the number. The photograph from northern China was the reason. I went into the hat box. I took out the cedar box. I opened it. I called the number on the card. It rang twice. A woman's voice said, "Mrs. Kang." She had known it was me. I had not said anything yet. I said, "How did you know it was me?" She said, "Because the number on that card has not been called in 19 years, since the woman who held it last died, and the only person who could have inherited it is you. Tell me what happened." I told her. I told her about the photograph, the grave, the flowers, the Dandong postmark, the fact that the brother was confirmed dead, the fact that we did not know who was sending photographs of my mother's flowers. She was quiet for a count of 7. She said, "Mrs. Kang, my name is Lydia Park. I am an American citizen, retired now, but for 32 years I was an intelligence officer. 26 of those years I spent in Seoul. The woman who gave Mrs. Bay that card 19 years ago was your husband's mother, 6 months before she died. I do not know everything she wanted Mrs. Bay to use it for. I know what I was told when she gave me the line to hold. I was told, there is a daughter from his first family. He will never tell you her name. If the second wife's son ever needs her, she will need a way to find him. I have been waiting 19 years for a phone call. I had begun to think it would never come. I said, she set this up for me, for a wife she could not have known would exist. Lydia said, she set it up for whoever would eventually marry into the family from outside. Yes. Her son was 8 years old. She knew she was dying. She knew her husband would not tell her son the truth about his sister. She also knew that one day her son might love someone enough to bring her into a house that had been built on lies, and that this person, whoever she was, whenever she came, would need a way to find the truth that did not go through your husband or his father. She did not know it would be you, Mrs. Kang. She did not know your name. She did not know you would be black or American or 24 years old or a maid. She only knew that someday, someone would be standing in your kitchen with a photograph of flowers she could not place, and she wanted that person to have a number to call. So she built the line, and she gave the card to the woman who had loved her best, Mrs. Bay, and she gave the line itself to me, because I owed her my life, and because she knew I would still be here when she was not. She said, it sat for 19 years, I had stopped expecting it, I am grateful you called. The kitchen was very quiet. I said, a daughter from his first family. Lydia said, Mrs. Kang, your husband has a sister, she is alive. She has been alive for 38 years. He does not know. His father told him she died as an infant. She did not die as an infant. She was given to a Korean-Chinese family in Dandong in 1988, 6 weeks after she was born, because your husband's father had a daughter he could not allow to exist. She said, her name is Han Sojin. She is in her early 60s, older than your husband by 23 years, because she is from his father's first family, a family that nobody in Ji-won's life has been allowed to know existed. She has been building an organization in northern China for 30 years. She has never moved against your husband. She has never moved against you. She has never moved against anyone in his network, until last week. I said, what did she do last week? Lydia said, she put flowers on your mother's grave. I said, what? She said, the flowers in the photograph that you had FedExed were placed there by you on the 17th. The photograph in your hand is from the 21st. By the time her photographer took that picture, there were also white chrysanthemums on the grave, Korean funeral flowers, which were placed by her people, not yours. Look at the photograph again. The bottom of the frame, to the left of your bouquet. I went and got the photograph. I had not noticed. There they were. A small, loose bunch of white chrysanthemums tucked against the side of the headstone, half hidden by my own arrangement. I had not noticed. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I said, why is she putting flowers on my mother's grave? Lydia said, because she is telling you in the only language she has that she is your sister-in-law, and your mother was her family too, and she is sorry your mother died alone. I said, what? Lydia said, Mrs. Kang, I am about to ask you to come to Dalian by yourself, without telling your husband, within 7 days. I would not ask if it were not necessary. There is a thing she needs to tell you that she will not put on a phone and that she will not put in a letter. I will arrange everything. You will be safe. You have my word for whatever that is worth to you. I said, I cannot leave my children. Lydia said, I know. She said, but I am going to ask you to come anyway. She said, because the alternative is worse. I said, what's the alternative? She said, she is dying, Mrs. Kang. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, she has weeks. If she dies without telling you what she came to tell you, the thing she knows dies with her and your sons will inherit a problem they cannot solve. I am not exaggerating. I am being precise. Come to Dalian, hear what she has to say, decide what to do with it. You are the only person in your husband's life who can carry this conversation without burning the family down. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time. I said, I need to think. She said, "Take 24 hours. I will call you at this time tomorrow." She hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor until G1 the baby toddled in with one shoe missing, demanding to be picked up, and I picked him up, and I held him against my shoulder, and I cried into his hair for a count of 100 while he patted my collarbone with one small hand and said, "Mama, Mama, Mama," like he was reminding me of something I'd forgotten. I had to lie to my husband. That is the thing about this story that I want you to understand before we go any further. I had to lie to him. I had to lie to the man I had built a life with on the explicit foundation that he would never lie to me. The night Lydia called me back, I told my husband I had to go to Atlanta for a week to handle paperwork on my mother's estate. I had been putting it off, I told him. The trust was finally closing. The lawyer needed me in person. It was the kind of lie that is plausible because parts of it are true. My mother's estate was still open. The trust was finally closing. The lawyer asterisk had been asking for an in-person signing. I am not proud of this. I will never be proud of this. But it was the only way. Because if I had told him your sister is alive asterisk, he would have stopped me from going. He would have gone himself. And whatever it was that Lydia thought I, specifically, was the only person who could carry, he was not the person who could carry it. I knew that without knowing what it was, because Lydia had told me he wasn't, and in 32 years of watching his family, she had earned the right to that judgment. So I lied. I packed a small bag. I kissed my 3 sleeping sons on the forehead at 4 in the morning. I kissed my husband at the front door, and he held my face in both hands and said, "Come home to me, Amara," asterisk, and I said I will, and I meant it, and I also knew there was a version of this trip where I would not. Minjun drove me to Incheon. He did not know. He thought I was going to Atlanta. I let him think it. I boarded a flight to Dalian under the name on a passport Lydia had FedExed to a private mailbox in Seoul 48 hours earlier. Naomi Bell. My middle name and my real last name. It was the last name I had carried for 24 years before I became Mrs. Kang, and seeing it on a passport made me feel for 1 second like the woman I had been before any of this happened, the one who had walked into Ms. Yoon's office in Atlanta with $312 in her account. I cried for a count of 40 over the Yellow Sea. Then I dried my face, and I got off the plane, and I did the thing I had come to do. Lydia met me at the airport. She was in her late 50s, soft brown bob, cream blazer, eyes that were exactly as kind in person as they had been on the phone. She did not hug me. She extended a hand. She said, "Mrs. Kang, thank you for coming." I said, "Call me Amara." She said, "Amara, the car is here. Han Sajin is at a hospice in Dalian. We have a window of about 4 hours before her pain medication makes her unable to speak coherently. I would like to take you there now." I said, "Take me." The car was a black sedan. The driver was Chinese. We did not speak in the car. Lydia handed me a thin folder. She said, "I want you to read this on the way. It is everything I have on Han Sajin's life that is verifiable. It is in English. I am happy to answer any questions you have after you've read it." I read. It is going to be hard to summarize, but I will try. Han Sajin was born in 1965 in Seoul to a man named Kang Min-ho, a name that would mean nothing to the rest of the world, but that was, according to Lydia's file, my husband's father's name from before he became the man my husband had known. Kang Min-ho had been 23 years old at the time. He had been a low-level enforcer in a Seoul gang that did not exist anymore. He had a young wife. They had a baby daughter together. Then in 1968, when Sajin was 3, the wife had been killed in what the files called asterisk a domestic incident, and what Lydia's handwritten note in the margin called almost certainly her own husband. After she discovered, he had been promoted into a position that required him to make decisions she could not live with. Kang Min-ho had not raised his daughter. He had given her to his sister, who had moved with her to a town near the Chinese border. And then in 1988, when Sajin was 23 and beginning to ask questions about who her father had been and why he had stopped sending money, Kang Min-ho had visited her, had told her in person that her mother had been killed by a rival, had told her she had a half-brother in Seoul she would never be permitted to know about, had told her she was to leave Korea. had given her enough money to start a life, and had sent her across the Tumen River into China. She had built that life. She had married a Korean Chinese man in Dandong. They had run a small trading company along the river. He had died of a stroke in 2009. She had no children. In the late 1990s, she had used the money her father had given her and the trading connections she had built to start what Lydia called a parallel organization, not a rival to her father's, a separate one in a separate country in a market her father did not touch. She had grown it for 30 years. It was, by 2026, one of the largest private logistics networks in northeastern China. She had never made an aggressive move against the Kang family in Seoul. She had never tried to contact her half-brother. She had also, according to Lydia's notes, been receiving photographs of him for 30 years, from a private investigator. One a month, standing on the steps of the Seoul estate, getting out of his car, holding the wedding ring she had not been invited to the placement of, holding 3 small boys on his lap on the lawn of the Koi Pond garden in late June. She had been watching her younger brother grow up from across a border for 36 years. She had said nothing, until she got the diagnosis in August. I closed the folder. I said, "Why now?" Lydia said, "Because she is dying, and because she has something to tell you that her father never told your husband, and that she cannot let die with her. And because, Amara, I am going to be honest with you, she also has a request." I said, "What request?" Lydia said, "Let her ask it herself." The hospice was on the outskirts of Dalian, a low building, soft yellow light through the windows, pine trees outside, the yellow sea visible past the trees. Lydia led me to a room at the end of a hallway. She said, "I will wait outside. Take as long as you need. When you come out, I will have tea ready." She opened the door. Han Sajin was in a hospital bed by the window. She was small, thinner than her photograph in the folder. Her hair was completely white and cut short. She was wearing a pale gray robe over hospital pajamas. There was an IV in her left hand and a small oxygen line below her nose. Her eyes were open, and they were exactly my husband's eyes. Exactly his eyes. The same shape, the same dark, almost black color, the same stillness. I had not been prepared for that. She looked at me for a long count. She said, in English with a soft Korean accent, "You are even more beautiful than the photographs." I said, "Mrs. Han." She said, "Sajin, please, come and sit." There was a chair beside the bed. I sat. She said, "Thank you for coming. I know what it cost you to lie to him to do it. I am sorry." I said, "How do you know I lied?" She said, "Because I know him. He would never have let you come. I have watched him for 30 years. He is a man who controls what he loves. It is not a flaw. It is what was made in him by the people who made him. But it is the reason I asked you to come without him." I said, "Why am I here, Sajin?" She said, 3 reasons. I will tell you them in order. The first is the easiest. The second is harder. The third is the hardest. I said, "Start." She said, "The first reason. I wanted to meet you. I have watched you for 2.5 years. I watched you arrive at our father's estate as a maid. I watched you survive a year in Vancouver. I watched you return with 3 sons that nobody, including me, knew about. You are the only person in the family I have lived around for 36 years who has ever chosen us. Everyone else was put there. You walked in. I wanted to look at you in person and say thank you before I died for choosing him." I started crying. I had thought I would be ready. I had thought wrong. She said, "I am sorry. I will go slower. I know this is much." I said, "Tell me the second reason." She said, "The second reason is the secret I have been carrying for 38 years. Our father killed many people, Amara. You know some of them. Mrs. Bay's son, 16 years old, killed for stealing $2,000. You know that one. There are others. There are perhaps 30 others. He was not a kind man. He was a man who believed in discipline as a religion, and the discipline he applied to others was the discipline he believed should apply to him, which means he was also the man who killed my mother, who was his first wife, whom he loved, because she found out about something he had done and could not live in the same house with him anymore. He did not want her to leave him. He killed her instead. I learned this when I was 23. He told me himself. He thought I would understand because I was his daughter. I did not understand. I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand. I never did. She paused. She took a sip of water from a small cup with a straw. She said, "Your husband does not know this. Your husband believes our father loved his second wife, Jiwon's mother, who died of leukemia, and that the only woman he killed was incidental to business. Your husband believes our father was a hard man who never crossed a certain line. The line he believes his father did not cross is the line our father crossed before your husband was born, with a woman whose name your husband does not know, who was my mother." She looked at me. She said, "I am telling you this because someone in your husband's life is going to come for him, and they are going to come for him for this. Not Mrs. Bay's son. The list of things our father did is longer than just Mrs. Bay's son. There is one in particular. There is a woman in Seoul, alive, in her late 60s, retired now, runs a flower shop in Yongsan, whose husband and infant daughter were killed in 1989 by our father. The man who pulled the trigger that night testified against our father in a private counsel hearing in 1991, was killed in 1992, and his name was never written down. But the wife knew. She knows. She has known for 35 years. She did not act because she was a woman alone and she did not have a way. She has a way now. 2 months ago, she made contact with my organization in Dandong. She offered me a partnership. She offered me information in exchange for resources. She wants to come for my brother. She wants to come for your sons." The room was very quiet. I said, "Did you say yes?" Sajin said, "No." She said, "I said no, Amara. I told her my brother is my brother and I will not move against him. I told her his sons are my nephews and I will die before I let any of them come to harm. I gave her nothing. But she knows where she stands now, and she knows I will not help her, which means she is going to go to the next person on her list, and that person is going to be someone who will say yes." I said, "Why are you telling me this and not him?" She said, "Because if I tell him, he will hunt her. He will find her. He will kill her. That is what he is. That is what our father made him. And in killing a woman who is in her late 60s, who has never harmed anyone, whose entire family was murdered by his father, your husband will become his father, fully and completely, in his own mind, for the first time. And he will not survive that, Amara. I have watched him for 30 years. He has held on to the boy who liked to draw by a thread so thin you can almost see through it. He told you about that boy. He told no one else. He has held on to him by the thread of you, and if he kills that woman, the thread snaps, and you and your sons will not get him back." I said, "What do I do?" She said, "You do what I cannot do and what he cannot do. You go to her. You go to the woman in Yongsan. You introduce yourself. You tell her who you are. You tell her you are sorry. You tell her her name belongs in her family's story, not in yours. You give her a thing that is worth more than revenge, and you make her say yes." I said, "Sajin, I am one woman with 3 bobbies. I am not equipped to do this." She said, "Amara, you walked into our father's house at 24 with $312 and a dying mother, and you walked out 3 years later as the wife of the most dangerous man in Korea with 3 sons he did not know about. You are exactly equipped to do this. You are the only person on earth who is equipped to do this." She paused. She said, "And there is something I can give you to give her, which is the 3rd reason I asked you here." She told me the 3rd reason. I am going to tell you about it, but not all at once, because the 3rd reason was the hardest, and I want to put it in its right place in this story. What I will tell you now is that when I left Sajin's room, 2 hours later, I had with me a small leather portfolio containing 3 things. A sealed envelope with a name written on it in Korean, a bank document I did not yet understand the value of, and a photograph from 1989 of a woman holding a baby on a stoop in Yongsan in front of a small flower shop that had a hand-painted sign above the door. The portfolio itself had not come from Sajin's hand. It had been brought into the room halfway through our conversation by a Korean woman in her mid-40s, in a charcoal gray suit, with very still eyes and very steady hands. Sajin had introduced her as Choi So-young. "My oldest friend," Sajin had said. 15 years. She runs the law firm in Hong Kong that holds the trust. She holds the rest of what I am leaving behind, too. She is the only person in the world I trust with the ledger. Choi had nodded at me once. She had set the portfolio on the bed beside Sajin's hand. She had said in English, Mrs. Kang, "When you are ready, I will be in Hong Kong. Do not come without an invitation. Do not come without your husband. The thing I have for you is not for a phone call, and it is not for a sister's deathbed." Then she had left the room. I had not understood it. I had understood there was more. I had understood the woman in the charcoal suit knew where it was. I had understood I was going to see her again. I had also, at Sajin's request, sat next to her bed for 40 minutes and held her hand. She had asked me about the boys. I had told her about them. I had told her that June laughed almost never, but when he did, it was a private gift you had to earn. I had told her that T did not speak yet, but he sang. He hummed long melodies at no one in particular, sometimes for half an hour, and we did not know where the songs came from. I had told her that Jiwon the baby had his father's exact eyebrows and his father's exact stubborn jaw, and that he was already, at 2 years old, the most quietly furious child I had ever met. She had cried. I had not made her stop. When I stood up to leave, she had said, "Amara." I had said, "Yes." She had said, "Tell him about me, after, not before, when it is done with the woman in Yongsan, when the boys are safe. Tell him I watched him grow up. Tell him I loved him. Tell him our father lied. Tell him I would have come sooner if I had thought it would not cost him everything." I had said, "I will." She had said, "And tell him I am sorry I do not have time to meet his sons. Tell him I would have liked to have held them, even once, even T, especially T." I had said, "Why T especially?" She had said, "Because T is the one who has my mother's face." I had not known what to do with that in the moment. I had nodded. I had squeezed her hand. I had left. I would understand it later. Hey, I'm going to pause here. If you are still with me, drop the word asterisk sister in the comments. I see everyone. I read everyone. And what's coming next is the part where I had to walk into a flower shop in Yongsan and ask a woman who had every right to hate me to forgive a man she had never met. I would not be telling this story if you weren't watching. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Okay, back in. I came home from Atlanta 4 days after I had left. G1 was waiting at the door. He had grown thinner in the 4 days. I could see it in his face. He had not slept well. He had not let the boys be put down by anyone but him at night while I was gone. Mrs. Jai told me this in the kitchen the morning after I returned, when she was making coffee and I was nursing a cup of it like a wounded animal. He did not ask me about my trip. He did not ask me how Atlanta had been. He did not ask me how the lawyer was, or how the trust closing had gone, or how my mother's grave had looked. He just held me at the front door for a long time, and he said, into my hair, "You are not telling me something." I said, "I know." He said, "Will you tell me?" I said, "Yes, but not tonight." He said, "Tomorrow." I said, "Maybe not tomorrow either." He pulled back, he looked at me. His eyes did the thing they do when he is in pain and is pretending he is not. He said, "Amara, are you safe?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are the boys safe?" I said, "Yes, now they are. They were not a week ago and they were not 3 days ago, and you did not know it, and I am working on it." He looked at me for a long count. He said, "Tell me what you need." I said, "I need you to trust me. I need you to not ask me where I go this week. I need you to not put a tail on me. I need you to know that I love you and I am keeping you and our sons alive by doing what I am doing, and I need you to wait for me to come back and tell you everything. Can you do that, G1? Can you do that, even though it is the hardest thing I have ever asked you?" He looked at me. He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "I am the husband of a woman who walked back into my country with 3 bobbies I did not know about, and lured my brother into a warehouse on the river, and ended a war I had been losing. Of course I trust you, Amara. You have not earned any other answer. You will never earn any other answer." I cried. He held me. We did not move for a long time. Then we went inside, and we ate dinner with our 3 sons. and June spilled apple juice on tea, and T did not even look up from the noodle he was studying. And Ji-won the baby tried to eat a spoon, and I watched my husband across the kitchen table, and I thought, I am about to walk into a flower shop in Yongsan and meet a woman whose family was killed by your father, and you do not know it. And I love you so much it physically hurts under my ribs, and I am the luckiest woman who has ever lived. The flower shop in Yongsan was small. It was on a side street off a main road, between a laundromat and a stationery store. The sign over the door was hand-painted, pale blue with white Korean characters and one small dark flower in the lower right corner. The sign in the photograph Sojin had given me had been the same sign, 35 years old, the same hand, still hanging. I went in on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, when the daughter who helped on weekends was not there, when the shop was empty. The woman behind the counter was in her late 60s, short, slim, steel gray hair pinned up in a bun. She was arranging a small bunch of white chrysanthemums into a vase, and her hands were moving slowly and precisely, and when she heard the bell on the door, she looked up and her eyes met mine and she did not smile. She said, in Korean, *welcome. I said in English, Mrs. Park, I am Amara Kang. I would like to talk to you. I think you have been waiting for this conversation. Her hands went still. She did not say anything. I said, may I sit down? She gestured to a small stool by the counter. I sat. She said, in English, with an accent that was thicker than Sojin's, how did you find me? I said, Han Sojin sent me. She looked at me for a long time. She said, did she tell you what I want? I said, yes. She said, and you came anyway. I said, I came because of what you want. She put down the chrysanthemums. She turned around. She walked to the back of the shop and closed a door that led to a small back room. She came back. She stood across the counter from me. She said, Mrs. Kang, I am going to be very direct with you. Your husband's father killed my husband and my daughter in 1989. My daughter was 9 months old. She was named Park Yoon-hee. She had been alive for 278 days. I have spent every day of the last 35 years carrying her. I have not slept a full night since. I have not loved another person since. I have run this shop for the dignity of being the woman who runs it instead of the woman who died with them. I have planned what I will do when the chance comes for 35 years. The chance is now. I have a meeting on Thursday with a man who will help me. I do not need Han Sojin. I have other paths. Sojin sent you here because she is dying and she wanted to tell me she will not stop me, and she wanted you to look me in the eyes before I do what I am going to do. I appreciate the courtesy. I am not changing my mind. I said, Mrs. Park. She said, yes. I said, my oldest son is named June. The middle one is T. The youngest is Ji-won. They are 2 years old. None of them have lived a day on this earth that your daughter got to live. June is the smallest one. He laughs almost never. When he does, it is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. T does not speak yet. He hums. He hums these long melodies that he could not have heard anywhere. Ji-won the baby. We call him Ji-won the baby because we cannot call him Junior, and we cannot bear to call him just Ji-won, who he already looks exactly like. Ji-won the baby is the most stubborn child I have ever met. She was very still. I took the leather portfolio out of my bag. I set it on the counter. I said, I'm sorry. Let me try again. I did not come here to tell you about my sons. I do not know why I led with that. I came here because Han Sojin sent me with 3 things and she asked me to leave them with you. You do not have to look at them. You do not have to keep them. I am not here for him. For my husband. I want to say that and I want you to believe it. I do not know what my husband knew. I do not know what his father did to your husband or your daughter. I only know what Sojin told me, and I know it was unforgivable. I am not asking you to forgive anyone. Will you just take the portfolio? That is all I came to ask. She looked at the portfolio. She looked at me. She said, in a voice as cold as anything I have ever heard, Mrs. Kang, get out of my shop. I said, Mrs. Park. She said, get out of my shop. I am not your story. My daughter is not your guilt. Your husband's father was a wolf. Your husband is a wolf. Your sons are wolf cubs who will grow into wolves. I will not be bought by Han Sajin, and I will not be moved by a beautiful young black American woman who has been sent into my shop to look me in the eye and ask me to swallow what cannot be swallowed. Get out. Take your portfolio with you. Do not come back. If you come back, I will call the police and tell them the wife of Kang Ji-won is harassing an old widow in Yongsan. And I do not think that is a story your husband wants in the papers. I stood up. I took the portfolio off the counter. I said, Mrs. Park, I am sorry. She said, I do not want your sorry, go. I went. I will not lie to you about what happened next. What happened next is that I sat in a coffee shop, 2 blocks from her flower shop for 4 hours, and I cried. I did not cry the way I cried when my mother died. I did not cry the way I cried over the Pacific. I cried because I had walked in there thinking I was going to do something good, and I had been an arrogant fool, and the woman I had walked in on had been right to throw me out. She did not owe me her grief. She did not owe me her time. She did not owe me the courtesy of accepting Sajin's apology delivered through a stranger. Who was I, 26 years old, married 3 years, mother of 3 small boys who got to live? Who was I to walk into her shop on a Tuesday afternoon and ask her to put down what she had been carrying for 35 years? I was no one. I called Lydia from the coffee shop. I said, she threw me out. Lydia said, yes, I expected she would. I said, you expected. Lydia said, Amara, listen to me. Mrs. Park has been waiting for 35 years to be heard. She has been waiting for one of them, one Kang, one anyone, to walk into her shop and acknowledge what was done to her. She is not going to give up the only thing she has built her life around the first time someone walks in. She is going to test you. She is going to throw you out. She is going to make you come back. The question is whether you will come back. If you do not come back, she goes to her meeting on Thursday and she does what she is going to do. If you come back, you have a chance. I said, when do I go back? Lydia said, she will call you, wait. I said, she does not have my number. Lydia said, she has my number. She has had it for a year. She will call me and I will tell her where you are. Sit. Wait. I sat in that coffee shop for 4 hours. Then I went to a hotel near the shop and I checked in under the name on my passport. I did not go home. I called G1 on a secure line and I told him I needed 2 more days. He did not ask. He said, I am here. The boys are here. T asked for you tonight. He hummed his lullaby at bedtime. Come home when you can. That was all he said. Mrs. Park called Lydia on the morning of the 3rd day. Lydia called me. She said, Amara, come to her shop today at 2. She wants to see you again. She will not tell me why. Bring the portfolio. Bring one more thing. Bring proof that you have done a thing for her with your own hands that nobody asked you to do. She will not yield on words. She will yield on action. That is what she has been waiting for. I said, what do I do? Lydia said, I do not know. That is for you to figure out. I figured it out the morning of the 3rd day. I rented a car. I drove 40 minutes out of Seoul to a small cemetery in Yeongju, where Sajin's records had told me Park Yoon-hee was buried. The grave was at the far back of the cemetery, in a row of children's graves from the late 1980s, in a section that almost nobody visited. I had to ask the caretaker, who walked me there, who waited while I knelt down, who did not ask why an American woman was visiting a child who had been dead for 35 years. The headstone was small, stone, slightly tilted. Her name was carved in Korean, her dates beneath, 278 days. There were no flowers. There had not been flowers for a long time. The grass around the stone had grown up over the lower edge. I had brought white chrysanthemums. I had bought them at a flower shop in Yeongju that morning, not Mrs. Park's, because that would have been cruel. I cleared the grass with my hands. I placed the chrysanthemums. I sat on a stone bench across from the grave. I sat with Park Yoon-hee for an hour. I told her about her mother. I told her her mother was alive and ran a flower shop in Yongsan and had not slept a full night in 35 years and was still, even now, even 35 years later, carrying her every day. I told her her mother was angry, and her mother was right to be angry, and her mother had been alone with it for too long. I told her about my 3 sons. I told her their names. I told her June laughed almost never. I told her T hummed. I told her Jiwon the baby was stubborn. I told her I was sorry that the world had not given her time to become anything. I took a photograph of the chrysanthemums on the grave, with my own phone, not for anyone but Mrs. Park. Then I drove back to Seoul, and I went to her shop, and I rang the bell. She let me in. The shop was empty again. She did not greet me. She walked to the back counter and stood behind it with her hands flat on the wood, and she said, "Show me what you brought." I put the portfolio on the counter. I put the new photograph on top of it. She looked at the photograph. She did not breathe for a count of 9. She said, in a voice that did not sound like the voice she had been using, "When did you take this?" I said, "This morning." She said, "Show me your hands." I held them out. She looked at the dirt under my fingernails, the thin scratch on the back of my left hand from clearing the grass. She said, very quietly, "You did not have anyone do it for you." I said, "No." She said, "You sat with her." I said, "For an hour." I told her about her mother. I told her her mother was still here. I told her I was sorry her mother had been alone with her for so long. Mrs. Park sat down on the wooden stool behind the counter. She held the photograph in her lap. She cried. She cried for the first time in front of another person in 35 years, and she cried for almost 20 minutes, and I sat across from her, and I did not say a single word, because there are some things you are not allowed to interrupt. When she had stopped, I told her about the portfolio, about Sajin's letter, about the trust. I read her the letter myself. She handed it to me and asked me to, because her hands were not steady. The letter was Sajin telling Mrs. Park, in her own handwriting, what their father had been, and that she had not known the full ledger until 2 months ago, and that she could not bring Park Min-hee and Park Yoon-hee back, but she could make sure Mrs. Park never had to work another day. The trust was $38 million, irrevocable, in Hong Kong, in Mrs. Park's name. The amount was not the point. The amount was an apology that could not be retracted. Mrs. Park listened. When the letter was done, she folded it back into its envelope. She said, "Mrs. Kang, I have one question." I said, "Yes." She said, "Your son, the middle one, T, does he have my husband's name? Does he have any part of him, anywhere, in any way?" I said, "I do not know your husband's name." She said, "It was Park Min-hee." I said, "No. My husband and I picked T because *T means great. We did not know any Park Min-hee. I am sorry." She said, "Will you do something for me?" I said, "If I can." She said, "Will you tell your middle son, when he is old enough to understand, that there was a man named Park Min-hee who never got to be a grandfather, and there was a girl named Park Yoon-hee who never got to be a sister, and the reason he gets to be alive is partly because they were not. Will you tell him their names? Will you make sure they are not forgotten?" I said, "I will, I promise." She said, "Then I will not move against your husband. I will not move against your sons. I will keep the trust. I will not meet the man I was going to meet on Thursday. You may go." I said, "Mrs. Park." She said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Mrs. Kang, do not thank me. I do not want your gratitude. I want you to keep your promise. That is all. Go home to your children." I went home. I told my husband everything that night. All of it. I sat him down in the sitting room, the same sitting room where the reading chair had been moved, where a pregnant woman with insomnia had been able to find her husband already awake, and I told him. I told him about the cedar box under Mrs. Bay's rug, about the photograph of her 16-year-old son, about the gold ring, about the newspaper clipping from 1989, about the business card that had no name on it, about the fact that I had been carrying it for 14 months and had not known what it was. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I was done with the box, I told him about Lydia Park, about the phone call, about what she had told me his mother had set up 19 years ago, 6 months before she died of the leukemia she already knew was going to kill her. I said, "Jiwon, your mother knew, about your father's first family. Your mother knew, and she did not tell you because you were a child and she did not want to make you carry it. But before she died, she gave a phone number to two women, Lydia, who would hold it from the outside, and Mrs. Bay, who would hold it from the inside, and she left instructions. She left instructions, G1. If my son's wife ever calls this number, tell her everything. That is what she said. Your mother left a line for me to call before I was born, before you were 8. She built it, and it sat for 19 years until I called it. He did not move. He did not speak. I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Keep going." I told him he had a sister. He stopped breathing for a count of 6. He did not look away from my face. He did not move his hands from where they were folded on his knees. His eyes did the thing they do when he is trying very hard not to do anything, when he is trying to absorb a thing his whole body wants to react to. And I watched his jaw do a small thing on the left side that I had only seen once before, which was the morning at the hospital when he had learned there were 3 Bobbies. He said, "Say it again." I said, "You have a sister. She is alive. She has been alive for 38 years. Her name is Han Sojin. She is 23 years older than you. She is from your father's first family. He told you she died as an infant." He lied. He gave her to a Korean Chinese family in Dandong when she was 6 weeks old, and she has been alive across the border your whole life. He closed his eyes. He started crying, without making any sound. I had only seen him do this twice. Once was in his driveway when he counted 3 car seats. The other was on the bed beside his dying aunt, except this was now, and his aunt was still dying, and he did not yet know that. He said with his eyes closed, "My father." I said, "Yes." He said, "He told me she died of pneumonia at 4 weeks old. He told me her name was Min Soo and that she was buried in the family plot in Yongpyong. There is a stone. I have visited it. I visited it every year until I was 18. I stopped going because it made my father angry. I thought he was angry because he was grieving. I was wrong. He was angry because he did not want me visiting a stone that had nothing under it." I said, "There is nothing under it." He said, "There is nothing under it." He opened his eyes. The tears were running freely down his face. He said, "Her name is Sojin." I said, "Han Sojin. She took her mother's family name. Your father gave it to her when he sent her away." He said, "Han." He said the name in Korean, slowly. He said it again. He said it a third time, very quietly, like a man trying out a word he did not yet trust his mouth to hold. I told him the rest. I told him she had watched him for 30 years. I told him she had cried when I told her about June laughing and T humming and Ji-won the baby being stubborn. I told him she had said the boy who liked to draw was held to him by a thread. I told him she had said the thread was me. I told him she was dying. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Weeks. I told him about Choi So-young in the charcoal suit, who held the ledger in Hong Kong, and who I would have to see eventually. I told him about Mrs. Park, about Yongsan, about Park Min-yi and Park Yoon-hee, about the chrysanthemums on a stone bench in Yongju, about the trust, about the meeting on Thursday that was not going to happen now, about the promise I had made that our middle son would know 2 names that did not belong to our family, but that had bought him his life. I told him about his father. I told him about his father's first wife. I told him about the sister's mother, that her name had been Han Soo-jin, that his father had killed her, that Sojin had spent her life learning that and learning to live around it. I told him the boy who had liked to draw had been raised by a man who had killed the women who loved him, and that this was not his fault, and that he had spent 30 years trying to not become that man, and that he was not that man, and that I knew it, and that his sister knew it too. He cried for a long time. He did not speak for almost an hour. I sat with him. I did not let go of his hand. At one point, about 40 minutes in, when his face had gone very still and I had thought he had stopped, he made a sound I had not heard before. Not a sob. A small, ragged thing from low in his chest. He said, "Amara." There was a song. I said, "What song?" He said, "When I was very small, maybe 4, maybe 5, before my mother got sick. There was a song she used to hum when she was making rice. I have not heard it in 30 years. I would not be able to hum it for you. I do not remember it, but I remember her humming it. I remember thinking it was a song nobody else's mother sang. I remember it being our song. He looked at me. He said, T's song. I said, yes. He said, my mother sang my sister's mother's lullaby. I said, yes. He pressed his face into my shoulder, and he sobbed for 10 minutes, and I held the back of his head, and I thought, I am holding a 40-year-old man who has just learned that his mother loved his sister's mother enough to learn her song, and to sing it over rice when she thought no one was listening, and to teach it to him without ever telling him whose song it was. He has been carrying that melody for 36 years, and our son has been humming it for 6 months, and none of us knew. When he finally lifted his face, he said, I want to meet her. I said, yes. He said, can we still? I said, I called Lydia this morning. Sajin is awake. She has been waiting for you to call. The window is small. We need to go tomorrow. He said, we. I said, all of us. He said, Amara. I said, she told me she would not have time to meet her nephews. She told me she would have liked to hold them, even once, even T. She said T had her mother's face. He stared at me. He said, T has my grandmother's face. I said, yes. He said, Amara, yes, we are going, get them ready. We flew to Dalian the next morning. All 5 of us. Minjun came with us, so did Lydia. We brought 1 suitcase of stuffed animals, because T would not sleep without his Tornir elephant, and June would not sleep without his small blue dog, and Jiwon the baby would not sleep without the small chipped watering can from the garden that he had decided 2 months earlier was the most important object in the entire universe. We landed at noon. The car drove us to the hospice on the outskirts of Dalian. Lydia walked us in. She said, she has been awake all morning waiting for you. She had her hair washed. She is in her best robe. She is excited, Amara. I have not seen her excited in a very long time. She opened the door. My husband walked in first, with T on his hip. I came in behind him, with June on my hip and Jiwon the baby, holding the hem of my jacket. Han Sajin looked up. Her eyes went directly to her brother. She had not seen him in person in his entire life. She had watched him through photographs for 30 years. He had not known she existed for 38 years. They looked at each other. Neither of them moved. Then T, who had been silent and watching from his father's hip, who at 2 years old did not speak, T looked at Sajin, and his face did a thing I had never seen on it before, and he reached out 1 small hand toward her, and he hummed. He hummed a long, low melody. Sajin closed her eyes. She said in Korean, I know that song. She said in English to her brother, Jiwon, the melody is an old folk song from the Northeast. It is not unusual to hear it. What is unusual is the cadence, the way he is holding the 3rd bar, the way he drops down on the 5th. That is the way my mother sang it. She had a way of slowing it that was hers, not the song's, hers. I do not know how your son is doing it. I do not believe in things I do not believe in. I am telling you what I am hearing. I am hearing my mother's version of a song any child in Northeast Korea could have heard. I do not know what to do with that. I do not need to know. I am only telling you what I am hearing. She opened her eyes. She looked at T. She said very softly, Come here, small one. My husband walked her son to her, and he laid T down on the hospice bed next to his aunt, and T, who did not like new people, who took 20 minutes to warm up to even Mrs. Jai on a good day. T curled into the side of his dying aunt and put his small hand on her cheek and hummed the rest of the lullaby into her chest, and we all stood in that hospice room and cried. We stayed for 3 hours. She held each of the boys. She told my husband everything, about their father, about her mother, about the photographs, about the years of watching, about the choice she had made not to come because she had not wanted to cost him the brother he believed he had, even though that brother had eventually almost cost him his life, about how sorry she was, about how she had hoped to see him in a way that did not require him to forgive her because she did not believe she deserved forgiveness. He held her hand. He said, in Korean, things I did not understand, and that Lydia later told me she could not translate because they were too private and not hers to carry. I sat on the other side of the bed with Ji-won the baby on my lap, and I watched my husband meet his sister. The boys did not cry. The boys understood, somehow, the way small children sometimes understand. They were quiet. They were warm. June brought Sajin a small piece of dried mango from his snack cup, which she pretended to eat, and which she actually held in her palm for the rest of the visit because she did not have the strength to chew anything. At one point in the second hour, while I was holding tea against my shoulder and Ji-won the baby had fallen asleep against my chest, my husband asked her the question I had been wondering since I had first read Lydia's file. He said in English quietly, "Sajin, where were you when he was hunting me?" She did not look away. She said, "3 places." She said, "The Russian shipment your brother arranged in March of last year. The one that did not arrive. That was me. I bought it out from under him through a shell in Vladivostok. He never knew where it went. It went into the Yellow Sea. I paid for it. I did not tell anyone." She said, "The hearing. The council that ruled in your favor in November, the 3 members who shifted their votes the week before. That was also me. I cannot tell you how. There are things you will read in the ledger Choi has been holding. Some of them will tell you. Some of them will not. But 3 of those men owed my mother things they had been carrying for 40 years, and I called those things in. That is why you have the next 20 years. She said, "And the photograph that came to your wife's porch in Vancouver, the one your brother used to flush her out, I knew it was coming. I had a man inside his Vancouver network who saw the camera. I had 11 hours of warning. I did not call you. I did not call her. I let her walk into the trap because I believed she would survive it, and because if I had called, I would have had to tell you who I was, and I was not ready, and I have spent every day of the last year wishing I had been ready. Amara could have died, brother. She did not, but she could have. That is mine to carry. I am telling you so you can decide how much of it to carry with me." She closed her eyes. She said, "I helped you in the ways I could without being seen. I did not help you in the ways that would have required me to be seen. That is the answer to your question. I do not know if it is the answer you wanted. I do not know if I am sorry for the parts where I helped, or for the parts where I did not, or for both. I think I am sorry for both." She closed her eyes. "I want to tell you what I did next because it is the thing in this story I am most proud of, and also the thing I am least sure I got right. I want you to tell me, in the comments, whether you would have done what I did, or whether you would have done something else, because I have been thinking about it for a month and I still do not know." I shifted Ji-won the baby in my lap so his head was on a pillow instead of my chest, and I leaned forward, and I put my hand on top of Sajin's hand on the bed. I said, "Sajin." She opened her eyes. I said, "I am the one who walked into that car. I am the one you let walk into that car. I am sitting in your room right now, in front of you, holding the smallest of 3 boys who are alive because the trap did not close, and I want to tell you something." She said, "Yes." I said, "I am not ready to forgive you for that yet. I want to be. I am going to be. I am sitting here looking at your face, which has my husband's eyes, which has my son's eyebrows, and I want to tell you I forgive you. I cannot. Not today. Not in this room. It is going to take me time. I am going to need to sit with the porch photograph for a while. I am going to need to think about what would have happened to my sons if I had not gotten out of that car. I am going to need to do that work, and you are not going to be here when I am done with it. And I am sorry about that, because what I want to tell you and what I am actually able to tell you are not the same thing." She did not look away. She said, "Thank you, Amara." I said, "Stop saying thank you." She made a small sound that was halfway to a laugh. She said, "I will try." I said, "But I want to tell you something else. Even though I cannot tell you I forgive you, I can tell you this. You waited because you were afraid. I know what it is to be afraid of being seen. I lived in a house in Vancouver for 11 months by myself with 3 bobbies, and I was afraid of being seen. And the photograph that almost killed me because I was tired of not being seen, and I came home anyway. I think I understand why you waited. I think I understand the shape of it, even though I cannot yet forgive the cost of it. And I want you to die knowing that the person who paid the cost is the person telling you, right now, that she is going to work on it. I am going to work on it, Sajin. I do not know how long it is going to take, but I am going to do the work. She started crying. She said, in Korean, something I did not understand, and Jiwon translated it later, and what she had said was, "The second wife's son married a woman braver than any of us deserve to live next to." I held her hand for a long count. Then I said, "Now you can talk to your brother." My husband sat with her hand in his for a long count. Then he said, "You bought the Russian shipment." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have been trying to find out who did that for 14 months. She said, "I know. I read your investigation files. Minjun's network is good. He almost found me twice. I had to move the shell once." He laughed. It was a small laugh, wet and surprised. And he laughed it into his sister's hand, and Sajin laughed too, and they sat there for a moment with the laugh between them. And I thought, this is a brother and sister who have been kept from each other for 38 years, and they have just discovered that one of them can make the other one laugh. They are going to lose that in 2 weeks. They are going to have known it for 2 hours. He said, "I forgive you for the photograph." She said, "Do not forgive me yet. You do not have to." He said, "I am forgiving you anyway. I am the older one in this somehow. I am old enough to forgive." She cried. He cried. I cried. Even T, who did not cry, made a small wet sound against my shoulder that was the closest thing he had to crying. Before we left, she asked one thing of my husband. She said in English in front of all of us, "Brother." He said, "Yes." She said, "When I am gone, will you take my organization? Not for yourself, for these 3, so that when they are men, if they want a thing that is not what their father built, they will have somewhere to put their hands. I have built a clean business. It is not ours. It does not have to be. I would rather it be theirs." He said, "Sajin, I cannot take a 30-year Northeastern Chinese logistics network. The men under you will not accept a Korean Kang. The Chinese authorities will not accept a transfer they did not see coming. I would burn what you built in the first 6 months." She said, "I know, I am not asking you to take it now. I am asking you to take it slowly. Choi So-young will run it for as long as it takes. She has the keys. She is the trustee. She has been my right hand for 15 years, and my men respect her more than they respected my husband. She will hold it for 10 years, 20 years, however long it takes, until one of these 3 boys is old enough and wants it. If none of them want it, she will dissolve it cleanly. If one of them wants it, she will hand him the keys. That is the structure. It is already legal. It is already filed in Hong Kong. All I need from you is your word that you will not block it, and that you will not interfere, and that you will not G1, you have to hear me, that you will not try to graft it onto your own. They have to be separate. They have to stay separate. The day they become the same is the day my father wins, 30 years late." He looked at her for a long count. He said, "I will not interfere." He said, "I will not graft." He said, "I will tell them about you when they are old enough." She said, "Thank you, brother." He said, "Stop saying thank you." She laughed, wet and broken, exactly the way her brother had laughed in a sitting room in Seoul almost 3 years earlier, when I had told him I loved him. She said, "I will try." She did not try very hard. Han Sajin died 11 days later. She died in the hospice in Dalian. My husband flew back to be with her at the end. He sat with her for the last 40 hours. He held her hand. He did not let go. Lydia was there. So was the nurse who had cared for her for the last 2 months, a Korean Chinese woman in her 30s who had cried when Jiwon walked back into the room because she had thought he would not come. He came home 4 days after the funeral. He brought her ashes. He buried half of them in the garden, at the base of the maple tree, in a small ceramic urn that he had made by hand. He had taken 5 days to make it. He had not let anyone help him. He had carved a small lullaby into the bottom of the urn in Korean characters that I could not read, but that he told me, when I asked, said for the boy who liked to draw. The other half he buried in Dondong, beside her husband. She had asked for both. He had given her both. I helped him bury her in the garden in the afternoon. The boys were watching. T did not understand. June did not understand. Jiwon the baby pointed at the small ceramic urn and said, Halmoni asterisk, which means grandmother in Korean, even though we had never taught him that word. We all stopped moving. My husband sat down on the grass. He said, how? I said, I don't know. He pulled Jiwon the baby into his lap and pressed his face into his small son's hair. And Jiwon the baby, stubborn, sturdy, quietly furious, Jiwon the baby for once did not pull away and let his father hold him for as long as his father needed. The maple tree was orange that week, not quite red yet. We buried her at the moment the leaves were just starting to turn. She is there now. She is part of the garden. When T is older, I will take him to the base of that tree, and I will tell him about an aunt he met for 3 hours and who he held with one small hand and who told him she knew his song. I will tell him he is named for a man named Park Min-hee who never got to be a grandfather, and a girl named Park Yoon-hee who never got to be a sister. I will tell him those names are why he is alive. I will tell him to remember them. I will tell him to teach them to his own children one day. That is the promise I made. I am going to keep it. I am going to tell you something about the next chapter before I go. The flower shop in Yongsan is going to matter again. The trust in Hong Kong is going to matter again. Mrs. Park is going to matter again, and not in the way you think. And the woman in the charcoal gray suit, the one who walked into Sajin's hospice room and handed me a leather portfolio and told me not to come without my husband, Choi So-young, has called me. She called last week. She said, Mrs. Kang, it is time. Bring your husband. I am in Hong Kong. The thing your sister-in-law left me is a ledger. Your father-in-law kept it for 41 years. Sajin inherited it. She read it once. She gave it to me. There are names in it that nobody alive knows. There are also names in it that I am going to have to read out loud to you and to your husband, because some of them are still alive, and some of them are looking for him, and some of them are looking for *you. She said, come in January. She said, do not bring the boys. If you want to know what is in the ledger Kang Min-ho kept for 41 years, if you want to know whose names are still alive, who has been looking for my husband, and who has been looking for me, drop the word *ledger in the comments below. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Tell me what you think of Sajin. Tell me what you think of Mrs. Park. Tell me if I did the right thing by lying to my husband or if I should have told him from the beginning. I read every comment. I will see you on the other side. I am Amara Kang. I have 3 sons. My husband is the man Seoul calls the devil, and I am the woman who walked back into his country with 3 bobbies he did not know about, brought him a sister he did not know he had, and laid her in our garden under a maple tree that turned orange the week she died. There is more to tell. There is always more to tell. But the boys are asleep, and my husband is reading in the sitting room, and the kettle is whistling in the kitchen. That part is mine. I will tell you the rest next time. Amara,